Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, our guest today is Representative Jim McLendon, Republican from Springville. Also, the V Team is going to look at the Common Sense Conservative Agenda 2014, and Mike Hubbard's got a new mailer out. I think the speaker can't handle the truth. This and much, much more next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard answers. My name is Bill Britt. I'm your host, joined here today by the fabulous V Team. Great to see everybody.
Great to be here this chilly Sunday morning.
Merci, oui, oui.
Great to have you back.
Thanks, glad to be here.
We missed you. We're all warming ourselves today by our beautiful digital fireplace. Don't you feel cozy?
I do. It's giving off a nice heat.
You know, somebody said this is not a busy time of year for politics, but there's a whole lot going on, isn't there? One of the big things right now, the House GOP just announced their agenda for the 2014 session called Common Sense Conservatism. What do you think? Common sense, conservative, Shalana?
Well, Barron and I were talking about this before we went on the show this morning about how difficult it is to find all of the bills that are supposedly in the package. We can't find the tax bills that have been pre-filed. I did take a look at the ones about the sovereign immunity issue that they want to extend sovereign immunity to local boards of education and to public employees. And you know, my response to that legislation is that's already the law. There is a line of cases called Ex parte Cranman where immunity has been given to municipal employees, public employees, for the very things that they list in this bill. So, you know, my common sense tells me we don't need legislation if we already have a judicially created exception for those employees.
What's the point?
Well, I think the point is that there's been so much criticism of what the House Republicans have done the last few years. They've been there 3 years. We did not get out of the House Republican majority what we anticipated we would when they got elected. What did we want? We want good, old-fashioned, conservative legislation. Taxes. Let's lower our taxes. And so what they've done is they've come through with a series of bills. I think there were 9 total on the list, and 6 of them addressed taxation. Unfortunately, none of them actually cut taxes. You know, a couple of them shift your tax, but I think the Small Business Tax Relief Act, Barry Moore sponsored, it's not a tax cut. They're touting it as one. All it does is shift your tax burden back 3 months. I mean, you still got to pay the taxes.
What's the deal with the DeMarco Taxpayers Bill of Rights? Has anybody looked at that?
Well, they have tried to pass that for the last 3 to 4 sessions. It just has not passed. It's just got caught up in the cycle of filibusters and things like that.
Well, and to me, the Bill of Rights is more than one item. This all it does is create an independent panel to hear your tax appeal.
Right.
How many people is that going to affect?
That's something that's really a bill that the Business Council of Alabama has been behind, and this tax coalition that they have tried to pass for the last 3 sessions.
Yeah, and I'm fine with the bill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good bill. We need it. But again, is that landmark legislation?
Do you think they're just trying to get a few things through, Shalana?
I do. I think it's probably so. These are fairly non-controversial issues. One of the other bills in the package is a tax credit for adoptions that take place in Alabama. One of the things that I used to do in my earlier practice was to domesticate foreign adoptions. And so I know firsthand, those are very expensive, they're painstaking, heartbreaking processes. And so to the extent that we can encourage adoption of Alabama children in Alabama, I think that's a wonderful thing. We're only talking about a $1,000 tax credit though. So again, it's a great idea, but it is very non-controversial.
There's another item on there, this conscience clause protection. You know, you can't be forced to participate in an abortion and sterilization, things like that. I think most Alabamians would say, yes, that's good legislation. And, you know, my biggest question about a lot of this stuff is if the tax code was so unfair, if all this stuff was so onerous, why did you wait 3 years to do it? We've had a Republican supermajority. Nobody could stop for the last 3 years, and we're just now getting around to adoption tax credits and closing the revolving door and streamlining business. taxes.
Well,
I mean, I don't get the delay.
And then so you talk about some of the social issues and that on abortions and that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of the hardcore conservatives really wanted the issue of abortion to be addressed. And sadly enough, here we have the majority of Republican in the House and the Senate, and that issue has not been addressed to really appease.
But is this the way to do it? I mean, what the bill does is it says that if you work in a medical facility and you have a conscientious objection to a procedure that is performed, you can't be forced to participate in that procedure. Just don't go to work there. I mean, we don't need legislation that tells us we don't have to do things. When we're talking about somebody's job, you just don't go to work at an abortion facility.
Well,
you don't go to work
but there
at these
are other
places.
things involved in it. I mean, contraception, sterilization, and other things too that are sort of incidental to the process. If you want to be a labor and delivery nurse, that's fine. You just can't be compelled to participate in an abortion or a sterilization if that violates your conscience. I think it's good legislation.
Well,
It's kind of common sense.
But is it necessary?
People should already know that. That is somebody's moral compass to know whether they want to work in that environment or not, or work for somebody like that.
And what happened to the Republican idea of less government? I mean, here we
Amen
are.
to that
It's
one.
another regulation that I think is unnecessary.
Well, but I'm going to disagree with you. It gives people a right to go to a job at a medical facility and say, I would like to do the 99% of my job. I don't want to do the 1% that violates my conscience. I don't have a problem with it in the world. I think it's great legislation. I think it's necessary. I think there are several things on here that are good legislation. My only complaint is a lot of it's halfway. Right. Some of it's got these grand titles, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It's really just setting up one independent commission. And it just seems like it's
a lot of window dressing. I mean, honestly, I think with the environment and what's going on in an election year, constitutionally, the only two things they have to do is pass an education budget and a general fund budget.
Right.
And I've heard so many people talking about this, and I just don't see that we will pass a whole lot more unless it's something that's completely non-controversial.
Well, to change the subject, talking about something sort of controversial, Speaker Hubbard this week sent out a new campaign mailer in which he calls reporters, and different reports say they're not true, that they're dishonest and they're made up. I say Speaker Hubbard can't handle the truth, and that's his problem. These reports were made by me and Kim Chandler of AL.com, and no one's refuted them. They killed the messenger. Have y'all looked at that?
I have seen it. Someone emailed me a copy of it, and I took a look at it, and you're exactly right. It goes around saying all these things are untrue, but it doesn't say, for example, that charge I dispute, here's the true thing. Instead, it gets this convoluted several hundred words of copy on a mail. It was one of the more ineffective mail pieces I've seen in a while.
I never saw out what was sent out against him until I saw, again, this was emailed around. I go back, from my years in the Attorney General's office. I worked for 2 Attorney Generals, and, it is a fact that there's a grand jury going on in Lee County. If I'm the judge of that case, it would raise my eyebrow just a little bit, because where did this mailer go? How broad was it? Is it to the point that there may be tampering with the jury, given everything that's going on in this environment? I think that's a question that has to be raised.
It can't be tampering with the jury because there's not a jury impaneled
Right,
yet,
well,
but
the
could it be
grand jury.
tainting the jury pool? And that's certainly a possibility. You got to figure that if this sort of thing would be written by lawyers, they're not going to address it point by point, because I certainly wouldn't, as a defense lawyer, address each allegation that's floating out there in the stratosphere. But what I would do is try to put my version of the facts forward.
Well, we'll be right back. Our guest is Dr. Jim McLendon, Republican from Springville. You're watching The V.
$20. It won't buy much in the way of Christmas cheer. Yet it means plenty of hope for the homeless. Your $20 feeds 10 at the Jimmy Hale Mission. The more you give, the more we feed. Help us nurture those with nothing else and show them the true spirit of the season. To give, please call 323-5878 or visit jimmyhalemission.com today.
I teach. I touch the future. I am AEA.
I keep the school clean every day for your children. I am AEA.
Congratulations on your scholarship. I help children make choices for college and careers. I am AEA.
We are AEA.
Welcome back to the V. Our guest today is Representative Dr. Jim McLendon from Springville, Republican, that is.
Springville Republican is correct, Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas.
You've been involved in a lot of the big issues that the Republicans have been involved in this last 3 years. I mean, some of the momentous things that have been done. One of the biggest ones was redistricting. Could you tell us a little bit about your involvement as the chair of that committee in the House?
Well, I certainly was honored by the members of that committee selecting me as chairing that House. It's a major job. Redistricting is the single most political thing that goes on in the legislative body. Fortunately, it's only once every 10 years,
right,
following the census. In 2011, we redrew congressional districts, State Board of Education districts, and in 2012, we dealt with the House and Senate districts. I feel very good about our work. We got Department of Justice pre-approval, or pre-clearance as they call it.
Right.
We got that in record time for all 4 of the plans. I was very pleased with that. We did have a suit against us, which is normal.
Right.
It's not unexpected to be sued over that. And just last week, the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. They remanded it back here to the 11th Circuit, and I expect our plan to stay in place and be a good, solid plan for the elections of 2014.
Now, this is the first time that the Republicans have been able to draw the lines in about 136 years. So not without controversy, I'm sure, but sounds like everything comes through.
Well, yeah, the folks that had been used to drawing the plan were not all that happy about it, but I feel like they got fair districts, and the Department of Justice feels like they got fair districts, and I believe the federal courts will show that that is the case.
Not an easy job, though.
A tough job, and it takes a long time to draw all of the districts and create all the districts lines and get the votes from the legislators that have to vote on the plan.
Right. Well, you're not unfamiliar with the big jobs. One of your biggest jobs has been to sort of shepherd part of the Medicaid reform issue here in Alabama. With all the things going on with Obamacare, with the expansions, and all the controversy, you know, working on Medicaid has been a big job for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, Medicaid is a $6 billion program here in Alabama that provides health care for the poor, people that can't afford it themselves. And it's taken an ever-increasing bite out of the general fund budget, which threatens all the other agencies that come out of the general fund budget. So we revamped it. That was a couple of years working on that project, and that was at the governor's request that we do that. And right now we have a plan in place. It'll take several years for the total rollout to occur. The expectation is we're going to save the taxpayers $50 to $75 million a year from now on with that. That was a major feat, and it affected a lot of people and a lot of dollars.
Well, right or wrong, Republicans often get criticized for not paying enough attention to the poor. And Medicaid, like you said, is for those less fortunate. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, if we had not come forward with that plan, the whole program was at risk of self-destructing just because of the expense of it. Not only are we causing a threat to those people that depend on it, but it was an ever-increasing burden on the taxpayer.
One other thing I know that you're involved in, because I've watched you for years, and that is you finally passed a law that makes it against the law to text and drive.
It is against the law in Alabama to read, enter, or send a text message while operating a motor vehicle. That was a 6-year project. I introduced that bill every year for 6 years. We got a little further and further along every time we did it, and finally got it into law, signed into law, and there's no question we're going to save lives. We're going to protect drivers, not only people that are texting, but people that folks that are texting can run into. It's a good law. I'm proud to have that one on the books.
Well, I know we watched you fight on that one quite a bit. You've decided that you're going to give up your House district seat and run for Senate. Now, I'm particularly concerned about this because your opponent running as a Republican is a lifelong Democrat, 27 years in office as a Democrat. Then all of a sudden, last year, he switches to become a Republican. How do we explain this to young Republicans coming up? How do we explain it to faithful GOP members that all of a sudden, after 27 years, you can switch parties and run against you, a lifelong Republican?
Well, it's going to be difficult to convince anybody of that. And where the real challenge will be the voters in a very conservative Senate District 11. I don't think they'll buy it. I just don't think it'll happen.
Well, I've been shocked, to tell you the truth, that they've allowed folks to just switch parties willy-nilly because, and I'm a little cynical, they wanted one more vote. But you've been in politics for a while. I mean, I'm sure you've seen crazier things, but don't you think this is a little disingenuous?
Well, I really don't want to get into someone qualifying that wants to run for office and call themselves what they would like to, but the voters will make the decision. They will ultimately make this decision, and I believe I have a pretty good idea which way they will go.
What's your biggest wish for Christmas?
Oh, my biggest wish for Christmas? Oh, man, that's a good one. I tell you what, we've got some family members. I got a family member that's having a hard time right now, and that's what I wish for, is for that person to enjoy Christmas and get to see the family and enjoy the holiday season.
I want to thank you for being here today. Our guest has been Dr. Jim McLendon, representative from Springville. You're watching The V. We'll be right back.
When some people struggle with their mortgage payments, they become frozen, petrified. Not knowing what to do, they do nothing. But the people who take action are far more likely to get the most positive outcome. Making Home Affordable is a free government program. Call now to talk one-on-one with a housing expert about the options that are right for you. Real help, real answers, right now.
I make sure to get your kids to school and home safe every day. I am AEA.
I make sure your child receives a healthy meal each day. I am AEA.
Thank you, AEA, for protecting our public schools and our futures. We are AEA.
$20. It won't buy much in the way of Christmas cheer. Yet it means plenty of hope for the homeless. Your $20 feeds 10 at the Jimmy Hale Mission. The more you give, the more we feed. Help us nurture those with nothing else and show them the true spirit of the season. To give, please call 323-5878 or visit jimmyhalemission.com today.
Welcome back to The V, the voice of Alabama politics. Okay, during the break, there were some issues brought up about the set decorations. Shalana?
Well, I leave for a week and you steal Charlie Brown's Christmas tree, which is kind of
happens.
sad. But
Yeah.
let me just say, though, that the manger scene is in front of me, which I think is appropriate. And
Well,
Darth
wait.
Vader is in front of Claire.
I'm a little offended that I have these characters in front of me. That does not fit my personality.
I think mine are
the main-
completely appropriate for
Oh,
my
the
Well,
Grinch is definitely
There's only
appropriate
maybe
for
a
you.
few people at the State House that would agree with that as appropriate for me, but I really don't think that. But that's okay. My
Well,
feelings have
I-
been hurt once before. I'll get over it.
Well, I feel
Merry
a little
Christmas.
bit like Ralphie right now in the bunny suit.
But, oh, wait, speaking of things, I just want to say one thing. Okay, I want to say War Eagle and congratulations to Auburn University national championship game
Yes,
going to Pasadena.
yes.
But I'll have to say congratulations to Alabama as well. They're going to the Sugar Bowl. But I will admit that I'm an Auburn fan and I'm very excited.
Yes.
Well, from this Alabama fan, I say congratulations to Auburn, and I hope they bring the crystal home.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. You know, it's pretty astounding and it's wonderful that Alabama and Auburn over the last 5 years have won the championship. There's one thing we know in the state of Alabama, and that is football.
And
Absolutely.
football is the only thing in Alabama that's bigger than politics.
Amen.
Well, speaking of that, Jim McLendon, great Republican, running for the Senate, brought up a good thing about this, or interesting thing about redistricting. It's the first time the Republicans have handled redistricting in over 100 years. There've been a lot of questions about how that's affected the state, and you guys that work in politics every day, and we cover it. What's your thinking on that?
But I'll say one thing. It's very interesting. The first time in ever that it hadn't had to go to the courts for them to do the redistricting.
Yeah.
In the past, it always had to go to the courts because the legislators would never handle it in the legislative body.
Well, I've been fairly consistent in saying I think they went overboard on redistricting in terms of trying to make exclusively Republican and exclusively Democratic districts. There are very few districts that are a toss-up where either side could win. There are also some very strange things as you look at the map. Typically, when you start with redistricting, you do sort of the corners and you work your way into the middle of the map. Alabama's looks like they went inside out, and there's some very strange districts that cross county lines and precinct lines and everything else.
Or go across the whole part of North Alabama, all the way from Morgan County all the way over to
But you look
Etowah.
at the reason that I think you have to do that, though, is you look at where the big cities are. I mean, you've got to start in the middle. You've got to start Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, and then work your way out to the corners.
Yeah, but you look at, and I'm not going to get into
I mean, has it really turned the state into white districts that are Republican and black districts that are Democrat? I mean, is that what's really basically happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, after the 2014 elections, count the number of white Democrats. I bet you'll be able to do it on just a few fingers of one hand.
Well, and that brings up another thing, McClendon was talking about his opponent. He didn't want to say much bad about him, but I did. I wonder about these guys switching parties. It just drives me nuts. After 27 years, listen, if you changed when Ronald Reagan was, came on the scene, or you changed even with Bush to, the early years. I mean, I get it, but, to all of a sudden have a road to Damascus moment, I'm not sure I'm buying all that.
Well, I think, in Alabama, the leadership, they've either pressured these guys, you either got to switch or we're going to beat you.
Yeah. Well, where's the principle of that thing? What you
and that would be my position, is if you don't like some of the things that your particular party is doing, then I don't think that you jump out of the party. I think you try to fix it within. You work on it from an inside the tent rather than saying, well, I'm just going to turn my back and I'm going to go and become something that I've never been ever before.
Well, and I think there's different ways to do it. I like Tom Whatley over in Opelika. I think he does a good job, and he's been a reliable Republican conservative vote. He switched having never run for office as a Democrat. But I think people suspected he was a Democrat because he worked for Democrats.
Yeah, he worked for a lot of Democrats.
Was he or not? But he's been a good, reliable Republican vote. It's another thing to run for office a number of times a Democrat, all of a sudden say, wow, this district doesn't favor me anymore, Jerry Fielding, and then decide, well, I'm seeing the light, I want to be a Republican. I don't care how reliable his vote is, I don't trust him. Tom Whatley's proven himself. He's never been elected as a Democrat, and he's stayed that way.
Now, I do want to say one thing very good about Dr. McClendon that he did, and I congratulate him for, and that's passing the no texting while driving bill.
Right.
As a parent who has a teenager that's going to get a permit this summer, that's one thing that we've already started talking about. And so it's amazing to me, the folks that don't know, in Alabama, you cannot text, you can't read it, you can't send it, you can't do anything with a text while you're driving. So congratulations to him.
He had a lot of
most
opposition.
broken law in Alabama.
Yeah, we've all been guilty of that, I'm sure, one time or another, but it is very
I've never done it. But anyway, Governor Bentley's running unopposed. I mean, this thing is just crazy. I mean, nobody knows how to run unopposed as governor.
Well, it's unusual in Alabama politics. The gubernatorial race is normally the top vote getter, and really all you've got is a lieutenant governor's race. Kay Ivey's got opposition by Dr. Stan Cook out of the Birmingham area, and then you don't even have anybody running for attorney general against Luther Strange, and then you've got secretary of state. I mean, so
and if you go back and look at what political parties traditionally do in states for elections. This may be a little too inside baseball, but political parties are the people who get top to bottom organization in every single county, every single precinct, and help out the ticket from the top to the bottom.
Right.
The Republican Party has done a very poor job of that the last few years. I think a lot of the money was concentrated into the hands of a few people, and it did not filter down into the district level. So the governor, I think, may have to pick up that slack. I think it's good for Republicans that he's running unopposed in both the primary and the general election. I think he's going to have to spend his money pushing down to the bottom of the ticket and helping the Republicans win all the way. I think if he was to get opposition, that would be very dangerous for Republicans at every level of the ballot.
And he's already started spending money. I mean, just on my drive in from work every morning from my house to my office, I pass 3 signs that have his campaign slogan on them down the interstate.
Well, he's out there communicating with the people. But the other thing is there's been such an emphasis, y'all, really in the last 2 election cycles, focusing on the election of the House and the Senate. And that's where all the big money is going in these House and Senate races.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, you know, we had Senator Billy Beasley talked about maybe running. Sue Bell Cobb talked about running. We got about 45 seconds. Any thought on them maybe jumping in?
Here's the problem with jumping in at this point. I mean, we have how many months before the general election? I mean, in
maybe
November.
6 months.
I mean,
6 months.
So you've got less than 6 months. You have well-funded candidates, and you have the name recognition, and you have somebody like Dr. Bentley or Governor Bentley who has a better than 70% approval rating.
If you jump in, you better bring a $5 million check with you or stay home is my thing.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's happening, but it is interesting. I know his folks are going, how do we run against each other? Well, maybe it's like playing golf. You just try to improve your game or something,
And you make no mistakes.
But you do have some congressional races. You've got Spencer Backus' seat, that's up. You've had Joe Bonner's seat, and they'll be running again, so you've got congressional races back on the ballot.
Always something interesting. Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you for watching The V. You can catch us at alreporter.com all during the week. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday. See you soon.
Hey, Mom. I got the job.
You've got the job. Welcome aboard.
I've got a job to do today.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Donate to Goodwill. Help provide job training in your community.